was sitting on the terrace of our house in Malibu, listening to the sound of the ocean waves. The sun was setting, painting the sky in golden pink hues. At that moment, I knew our marriage needed a reset. David was a great engineer, but lately, it seemed like his career had stalled, and with it, our relationship. David worked for a large marine company, and all his efforts were focused on his job. I often felt lonely and neglected. Sometimes it seemed he had forgotten he even had a wife. But not today. Today, I was determined to change the course of events. "David," I called when he came into the house, "why don't we spend the weekend on a yacht, just the two of us? We could relax, reconnect." He looked at me with surprise. "A yacht? That's an unexpected plan, but we don't have a yacht, Anna." "We can rent one," I insisted. "And, I thought it might be a good opportunity to invite Victor, your boss. It could help you build a stronger relationship with him. It would give you a chance to show yourself in a different light." David looked at me somewhat cautiously, but I saw interest in his eyes. I knew how much his promotion meant to him, and I hoped this suggestion would spark something in him. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, let's try," he said, though his voice still sounded uncertain. I smiled, feeling a small victory. The next morning, we contacted Victor, suggesting he join us for a weekend on the open ocean. To my surprise, Victor immediately agreed. And so, just a few days later, the three of us were standing at the pier, waiting for our departure. As we boarded the luxurious yacht, rented especially for this occasion, I felt a slight thrill. Something told me that this journey would be the beginning of something bigger than just a sea adventure. The weather was perfect for our voyage from the very morning. A light breeze played with my hair, and the sun gently warmed my face as we sailed away from the Malibu coast. I stood on the deck, inhaling the fresh sea air and watching the shores slowly fade away into the blue haze. Victor seemed relaxed, smiling and laughing, while David kept checking the instruments, as if trying to hide his anxiety behind a mask of technical focus. It had been a few hours since we set sail, but the tension between David and Victor was still palpable, like a taut string. I could see my husband trying to start a conversation, but every time their dialogue turned into formal remarks and polite nods. I began to worry that this trip, which I had planned for their rapprochement, would not bring the desired result. I decided it was time to step in and change the situation. "How about we go fishing?" I suggested, trying to sound as cheerful as possible. "It'll lighten the mood. Besides, David, you've wanted to try sea fishing for a while." Victor nodded, supporting my idea. "Great idea, Anna. I haven't fished in a long time. David, what do you think?" David lifted his gaze from his instruments and seemed to think for a moment before nodding. "Why not?" he said, and I noticed his shoulders relax a little. The three of us started preparing the fishing gear, and within a few minutes, we were sitting at the stern, holding rods in our hands. I let the men have some time to themselves and stepped back, staying on the deck, observing them. After a while, I noticed the ice between them beginning to melt. Victor made some playful comments, and David even smiled a few times in response. I felt relieved. Things were going as planned. But as I remained on the sidelines, I couldn't help but notice how charismatic Victor was. His confidence was palpable in every move, in every word. He was the kind of man who always knew what he wanted and wasn't afraid to get it. For the first time, I looked at him with such interest, like a puzzle I wanted to solve. Time dragged on slowly, yet flew by unnoticed. The fish weren't biting, but that no longer mattered. I felt my idea had worked. David and Victor were really starting to find common ground. Night descended upon the ocean, covering it with a black velvet cloth pierced by the moonlight. It hung above the horizon like a giant silver disk, casting a soft glow on the calm waters. I stood on the deck, looking at this view and feeling a desire to do something unusual, something that would break the monotony. "Let's go for a swim," I suggested, turning to Victor and David. "Under the moon, right now. The water is calm, and it would be a wonderful adventure." Victor smiled and nodded immediately. "Great idea. Nighttime water is always special." But David frowned and shook his head. "I don't think it's a good idea. We're far out in the open ocean, and swimming in the dark can be dangerous. It's better to stay on deck." I felt disappointed, but tried not to show it. "Well, if you don't want to, I understand," I said, turning to Victor. "Well, the two of us can go if you don't mind." He laughed and said, "Of course, I don't mind. I love adventures." We both approached the edge of the yacht, and I felt my heart start to race. I glanced at David, but he just shrugged and stepped back. We jumped into the water simultaneously, and the cold ocean immediately embraced us. I felt a rush of excitement as all my senses sharpened. Victor was close, and his presence felt almost physical, like the warmth emanating from his body. We began swimming side by side, slowly, calmly, enjoying the moment. The water was cool, but there was something soothing and captivating about it. I felt the day's tension gradually fade away. Victor swam closer, and our eyes met. "You are indeed a brave woman, Anna," he said quietly, almost in a whisper. "Not everyone would dare to do this." "I just love living life to the fullest," I replied, feeling his words touch something inside me. We continued swimming, but I already knew that something more than just friendly communication had developed between us. Our conversations became more personal. We discussed dreams, ambitions, fears. Victor spoke candidly about his successes and failures, about what drove him forward. I saw in his eyes a sincerity and strength that was missing in my marriage with David. His words carried such confidence that I couldn't help but feel attracted to this man. I looked at his face, at the droplets of water running down his skin in the moonlight, and felt something unknown and magnetic growing within me. Victor seemed so confident and yet so approachable that I felt drawn to him like a magnet. When we returned to the yacht, I tried to hide my feelings, climbing aboard first. Victor followed me, and as he got close, our faces were too close. For a moment, I felt his lips on mine. It was a short kiss, barely noticeable, but significant. At that moment, everything around us froze. My head spun, and I felt a mixture of embarrassment and attraction. I pulled away, trying to act like it meant nothing, but inside, everything was in turmoil. I knew I couldn't deny what I felt. I woke up to someone shaking my shoulder. Opening my eyes, I saw David with a tense expression on his face. The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, bathing the world in soft morning light. "What happened?" I asked, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep and understand why he looked so worried. "There's a problem with the engine," David replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "It suddenly stopped working, and we can't move forward. Moreover, the connection to the shore is also lost. The antenna isn't catching a signal." I felt a chill of fear run down my spine. We were in the open ocean, and around us there was nothing but endless water. Panic began to rise within me, but I tried to remain calm. "What should we do?" I asked, trying to sound confident. "I'm going to the engine room to figure out what's wrong," David said, already heading down. "But it will take time to understand what exactly is wrong. We might need external help." I nodded, watching his back until he disappeared below. Then I turned to Victor, who was already on deck, observing the situation. "We need to try to restore communication," I said. David will take care of the engine, and we'll try to set up the satellite antenna. Victor nodded. All right, let's try. He headed to the antenna control panel, and I followed. Together, we began carefully inspecting the equipment, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. It seems the antenna can't catch a signal due to some kind of malfunction, Victor noted, checking the wires and settings. Maybe the issue is in the firmware or one of the system boards. I watched him work, his focused face seeming even more attractive. His confident movements and calmness in this situation gave me hope. Do you think we can fix it? I asked, not taking my eyes off him. I think so, he replied without stopping. But we'll have to do everything carefully and slowly, so we don't damage the equipment further. We might have to set everything up manually and maybe reconnect some of the contacts. I nodded, deciding to follow his instructions. We worked side by side, exchanging short phrases and technical terms. Victor explained what to do, and I tried to understand and do everything as accurately as possible. Gradually, my anxiety began to fade. I felt a special connection arising between us again, something more than just working together. A few hours passed, and the sun was already high in the sky. I was starting to feel tired, but Victor didn't give up. At one point, he leaned toward me to help connect the last wire, and I felt his hand on my shoulder. It was just a fleeting touch, but it made my heart beat faster. I think we're almost done, he said, and I felt a wave of relief inside me. He smiled at me, and I felt warmth from his gaze. But just as I was about to say something in return, a loud crack sounded. The antenna suddenly sparked, and Victor quickly pulled his hand away. Damn, he cursed. We need to check again. Apparently something is still not connected properly. We continued working on setting up the antenna, and I felt more and more how our interaction with Victor was becoming more personal, almost intimate. He stood close, explaining the technical details to me with unexpected ease, making everything so simple and accessible. There was a warm humor in his voice, and every joke he made brought a smile to my face. See this wire? Victor said, pointing to one of the antenna's components. If we connect it wrong, our antenna will start picking up signals from the nearest space stations instead of the ground. He smiled, and I felt my heart flutter slightly. Then we better be very careful, I replied, smiling too. I liked how effortlessly he made even the most complicated things seem. It seemed like he was enjoying every second of this work, as well as our conversation. Victor leaned closer to help me connect one of the wires, and I felt the warmth of his breath on my cheek. His hand lightly touched mine, and I couldn't help but notice how that simple gesture made my heart beat faster. We exchanged glances, and in his eyes, I saw something more than just interest. You know, Anna, he said quietly, not taking his eyes off mine. Sometimes, even in the most difficult situations, you can find something good. I nodded, trying to understand what he meant, but my thoughts were confused. Yes, I suppose you're right, I replied. We continued to work side by side, and at some point, I felt our touches becoming more deliberate. His hand lingered on mine longer, his gaze was more intense. I could feel a special tension building between us, something that was impossible to ignore. Victor continued to explain how the different components of the antenna worked, but there was a note of something deeper, almost intimate, in his voice. He told me about his work, his life, and I found myself wanting to know more about him. I was drawn to his confidence, his energy, his ability to remain calm even in such challenging situations. At some point, feeling the pull, I took a step toward him. Victor didn't step back. On the contrary, he moved slightly closer to me. We were so close that I could smell his skin, hear his breathing. For a moment, his hand touched my cheek. Our eyes met, and at that moment, I realized that something more had developed between us. I couldn't resist, and we shared a kiss. It was a kiss filled with passion and, at the same time, tenderness, short but deep. I felt everything inside me boil. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. When we pulled away, I saw the same excitement in his eyes that I felt inside. He smiled, and I realized I was completely captivated by his charisma, his energy, and his confidence. This man was nothing like my husband, and it frightened me to admit to myself how strongly I was drawn to him. A few hours of intense work had passed, and I began to feel tired. The sun was already setting, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and pink. Victor and I were still working on setting up the antenna when suddenly I heard a muffled sound coming from below in the engine room. The yacht's engine rattled, roared, and a moment later, I felt a slight vibration under my feet. The yacht was alive again. I sighed in relief and looked at Victor, who smiled back at me. "Looks like David did it," he said with a slight grin. "Yes, it seems so," I nodded, still feeling the tension, but now also a sense of relief. At that moment, David came up on deck. His face was smeared with oil, and he looked exhausted. "The engine is running again," he announced, sighing. "But it wasn't easy. It seems one of the systems overheated, and I had to manually reconfigure the controls." I felt proud of him. He had always been good at what he did, a true professional. But at the same time, I noticed how his knees were buckling from exhaustion, how he could barely stand. He looked like he was about to collapse. "David, you need to rest," I said softly, coming closer and touching his arm. "You look completely worn out." He nodded, closing his eyes for a moment. "Yes, you're right. I need to rest a bit." "Don't hesitate, guys. Keep enjoying the trip," he said, tiredly heading to his cabin. I watched him slowly walk, noticing how hard each step was for him. My first reaction was concern for my husband, but another thought quickly flickered through my mind. David was going to rest. That meant I had time to continue what had started with Victor. When the door of David's cabin closed behind him, I turned to Victor. He was standing by the railings, looking at the water, and I noticed a faint smile on his face. The sun was setting, reflecting in the water with a soft golden light. "So, what shall we do?" Victor asked, turning to me with an amused expression. I took a step closer, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. "I think after everything that happened today, we should go to our cabins and get some rest," I replied with a slight smile, feeling a surge of excitement. Victor nodded slightly, his eyes glinting in the sunset light. "You're right," he said, stepping closer. "Sometimes the best way to relax is to spend time in peace, reflecting." I felt his hand on my waist. His touch was light but firm. We were standing so close that I could feel his breath on my skin. I knew what we were doing was wrong, but at that moment, I didn't want to think about right or wrong. I felt more alive than ever before. "Then, see you in the morning?" he whispered, his voice low and soft. I nodded, unable to speak, feeling my excitement grow with each moment. We slowly went to our cabins, and I knew this night would be long. My heart was filled with conflicting emotions, but one thing I knew: my thoughts would be occupied with Victor all night long. The night enveloped the yacht in silence, with only the gentle sound of waves against the hull breaking the peace. I sat in my cabin, under the soft light of a lamp, contemplating my decision. My thoughts were focused on what I was about to do. The time had come, and I knew I could no longer postpone it. I chose my dress, seductive, form-fitting, and highlighting every curve. It was made of a light, semi-transparent fabric that flowed smoothly with each movement. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and couldn't help but notice how excitement and anticipation mixed in my gaze. Ensuring that David had fallen asleep after the exhausting day, I carefully left my cabin. The corridor was dark, lit only by the faint glow of sidelights. I moved silently, trying not to make a sound. I approached Victor's cabin and paused in front of the door, listening for any sounds from inside. The only sounds were the soft shifting of objects and the faint hum of the air conditioner. I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and gently opened the door. Victor was sitting on the bed, dressed in casual clothing, and looked up as I entered. His eyes lit up with a spark of understanding, and he instantly grasped my intentions. A smile appeared on his face, and I felt my heart race. "Anna?" he said, rising from the bed and walking toward me. "I've been waiting for you." He was confident, and it was even more alluring to me. Victor moved to the bar in the corner of the cabin to pour champagne. I noticed he lingered at the table, as if checking or preparing something, but at that moment, I was too absorbed in my emotions to pay it much attention. "You look absolutely stunning," he said, handing me a glass of champagne. "I hope you'll relax and enjoy the evening." I accepted the glass, smiling back at him. Inside, I was filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Although I noticed Victor's delay at the table, it didn't deter me from focusing on what was happening between us. I decided that what mattered most was the moment we were sharing right now. The light in Victor's cabin was soft, creating an intimate atmosphere that drew us closer. I took a few steps towards him, feeling my excitement rise with every moment. My heart raced with anticipation, and I could sense his confidence and charisma, which only heightened my desire. I approached Victor closer and gently touched his shoulder, brushing my lips against his neck. His breathing grew shallow, and I felt his body responding to my touches. Every glance, every movement only intensified my attraction. We were moving towards the climax, and I felt waves of passion enveloping us. I was completely consumed by the moment, feeling his strength and assurance drawing me in. It seemed we were on the verge of something incredible, and everything around us lost significance. However, suddenly Victor stopped me. His expression turned serious, and he pulled away, maintaining distance between us. "Anna, wait," he said, his voice firm but filled with inner conflict. "I can't continue like this. This is crossing the line." I froze, filled with confusion and bewilderment. Fear crept in. "What's wrong? Why did you stop?" Victor sighed, and I noticed his face change. "I recorded everything on camera," he said, his voice resolute. "I'm going to show it to David." My eyes widened in shock. I couldn't believe everything that had just happened was being recorded. Panic swept over me, and I felt a tight knot forming inside. "Are you kidding me?" I blurted out. "Why did you do this?" Victor remained silent, continuing to look at me with a dark, unreadable gaze. I stood there, completely bewildered, realizing that everything I had just experienced could turn against me in the most unexpected way. I stood in complete horror, my mind unable to grasp what had just happened. My hands trembled, and I was on the verge of panic. Victor was resolute, his gaze firm and unyielding. He turned on the camera recording and began preparing to show it to David. "Please, Victor, don't do this," I begged, my heart racing with fear. I tried to get closer, but he only pushed me away. "You can't do this. It will destroy everything I have. Please think about it again." I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. They began to roll down my cheeks. I threw myself at his feet, clutching his legs, and with a trembling voice, I continued to plead, "Victor, I'm begging you. Please don't show this to David. We can fix everything. I'll fix everything if you just give me a chance. Please don't ruin my life." Victor remained unyielding. His face showed no trace of compassion. He looked at me, but his eyes held no hint of hesitation. "Anna, it's too late," he said coldly. I can't just ignore what happened. I have to show it to David. My words and pleas seemed to have no effect on him. He pushed me away, and I fell to the floor, continuing to beg. "Victor, please don't go. We can resolve this peacefully. I'll fix everything, I promise," I cried in desperation, but he merely turned and headed for the door. I lay on the floor, consumed by fear and despair. My thoughts were filled with terror at the impending revelation that could destroy not only my life, but my husband's as well. I knew time was running out, and all I had left was to hope for a miracle that might stop Victor before he could show the recording to David. When Victor showed the video to David, he was stunned and furious. At first, David couldn't believe his eyes, but when the reality of what had happened finally hit him, rage filled his face. He was not just disappointed, he was devastated and hurt. "Did you really try to cheat on me, Anna?" David roared, his voice full of pain and anger. "How could you?" I stood there, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen that captured my most intimate and shameful moments. I felt my body trembling with fear. My shame and guilt were overwhelming. David, unable to remain calm, made a decision. His anger was so intense that he couldn't stay composed. "Victor, take her away from the shore," he ordered, his voice firm and resolute. "I don't want to see her. She needs to understand the gravity of her actions." Victor nodded and began preparing to carry out the order. I felt my panic rise even further. "No, David, please," I cried out, but he didn't respond. I was escorted to a lifeboat, which had been prepared for this very situation. I looked at David one last time. His face was devoid of emotion, and that was the most terrifying part. He was determined, and I knew this punishment was not just for me, but to make me fully realize what I had done. In the lifeboat were only the bare essentials, minimal supplies of food and water. Victor, following the orders, pushed the lifeboat away from the yacht and began to move away. I sat in the lifeboat, huddled with fear and despair, watching as the yacht drifted farther and farther away until it was out of sight. I was left in the open ocean, alone with my thoughts and the unimaginable feeling of guilt. I knew the punishment was deserved, but the internal terror and fear of what awaited me were unbearable. As the lifeboat drifted away from the yacht, I heard David's voice shouting from afar. He stood on the yacht's deck, his voice filled with cold determination. "Anna," he yelled, and his words pierced my heart. "All ties between us are severed. I will send the divorce papers to your friend's address. You will not be coming back." His words felt like a lightning bolt, and I felt my world crumble. Sitting in the lifeboat, surrounded by the darkness of the ocean and the profound silence, I was overwhelmed with fear and anxiety. I tried to push aside thoughts of what awaited me. The lifeboat slowly drifted away from the yacht, and I realized that the only thing left for me was to try to make it to shore on my own. I looked out at the vast, threatening ocean. Every movement of the water seemed to oppose my fear and despair. Gripping the oars, my hands trembling with fear and fatigue, I began to row, struggling against the growing sense of hopelessness. Each stroke was heavy, and I felt my strength waning. But I knew I had to keep fighting to survive. As I rowed, I reevaluated my actions and realized how deeply I had erred. All the moments that led me here now seemed so different. I thought about how I had destroyed my life with my own hands. Fear and exhaustion mixed with the realization of my mistakes. Each stroke was a test, and I continued to struggle despite the difficulties. I had to find the strength and courage to face this trial and hope that somehow I could make amends and find a path to redemption. The ocean was relentless. Each wave crashing against the lifeboat felt like an attempt to throw me into the abyss. I struggled to hold on as the wild waves and scorching sun offered no respite. The limited water supply in the lifeboat was a constant reminder of my precarious situation, and I knew I had to be careful not to waste it. Every day and night spent on the open ocean was a true test of endurance. I fought against fatigue and thirst, rowing with the hope that it wasn't all in vain. In moments of solitude and despair, I began to realize how selfish and reckless my behavior had been. Every choice, every action that had led me here now seemed incredibly foolish and destructive. In the silence of the ocean under the blazing sun, I began to reflect on my life. The memories of how I had destroyed everything dear to me filled me with deep remorse. My life seemed like one big mistake, and I realized that all my actions had been driven by selfishness and a lack of consideration for the consequences. I understood that I needed to change. If I managed to reach the shore, I promised myself that I would strive to start a new life, one that was more conscious and honest. Despite everything that had happened, I knew I had to try to alter my fate and become a better person. These thoughts gave me the strength to keep fighting, even when hope seemed faint. I knew that the struggle for survival at sea was not just a physical challenge, but an internal one as well. I needed to prove to myself that I could overcome this and start anew, to be honest and wiser in my actions. My efforts and determination became my allies in this endless ocean. I continued to row, hoping for the best and believing that I could reach the shore and perhaps find a new chance at life. After countless hours battling the ocean, with every wave seeming hostile and threatening, I finally spotted a faint line on the horizon. It was like a light at the end of the tunnel, and I felt hope returning. Exhausted, but determined, I directed all my remaining strength towards reaching the shore. My body was worn out, but I kept rowing, putting every ounce of determination and effort into each stroke. The waves no longer seemed insurmountable, and the path to the shore felt within reach. I knew this was my last chance, and I couldn't afford to stop. As the shore became clearer and more defined, my heart raced with excitement. I could see the sandy beach, green trees, and the coastline, and it was incredibly encouraging. I realized that this moment could mark the beginning of a new life, a chance to start over. When the lifeboat finally touched the shore, I stumbled out and collapsed onto the sand, exhausted. Lying on the beach, feeling the sand beneath me, was a symbol of a new beginning. Every movement and breath felt like a sweet release from the hardships of the ocean. I began to understand that this wasn't just a rescue. It was an opportunity to start anew. I knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but the thought of a new beginning and the chance to correct my mistakes inspired me. I was ready to embrace this new life, no matter how difficult it might be, and to do everything I could to become better. When I finally reached the shore, I was utterly exhausted, but alive. Every movement felt like an effort, and I could barely stand, but the feeling of solid, firm sand beneath my feet was an incredible relief. I collapsed onto the beach, gasping for air and trying to steady myself. I was alive, but fatigue and the weight of exhaustion were almost overwhelming. Struggling to my feet, I looked around. The shore was empty, and the surrounding nature seemed new and unexplored. I realized that David had severed all ties with me, and returning to him was pointless. Everything left behind was one huge mistake, and I had to come to terms with it. Being on the shore was not only a physical, but also an emotional reckoning. I knew that if I wanted to survive and start anew, I needed to acknowledge my mistakes and move forward. I understood that returning to the past was impossible, and hoping to restore old connections would be self-deception. I decided to start over, building my life from scratch. I needed to reevaluate everything I had done and set new goals and values. I realized that the road ahead would be difficult, but the internal urge for change was so strong that I was ready to face all challenges. Now I was alone, but this solitude gave me the chance to begin anew. I was ready to learn from my mistakes and work on myself to become a better version of myself. I knew the path would be tough, but I was determined to move forward and build a future where I could be proud of my actions and decisions.